Good morning out there, all you fabulous grade 5s. Lovely to have you with me again today. Let's continue our maths journey. A reminder that if you want to email me, it's grade5@worksheetcloud.com. After the lesson, click on the link above, do the worksheet, make sure that you've understood what it is that we're doing today. As I started yesterday, we're going to work with a few quick mental arithmetic problems every day just to keep our brains sharp. This is the bedrock of a good maths result. If you get these things right, then everything else falls into place much more easily. So I hope you're ready with a pencil and paper. You will have 40 seconds and there are 10 very short problems. So you don't need to write the questions, just the answer. Right, and go. Time's halfway. And stop. No one can see whether you've really stopped, so it's really just a question of integrity. It's not about getting them all right. Of course, I'd love you to get them all right, but it's about practice and improvement. And it's actually the practice that helps our brains get better, not the fact that we got 8 out of 10 or 6 out of 10 or 3 out of 10. It's the practice that's important. All right, so you're going to mark them for yourself. If you got it correct, give it a tick. If you got it incorrect, just put the right answer there. 13 minus 4 is 9. 15 minus 6 is also 9. 9 minus 5 is 4. 12 minus 7 is 5. 18 minus 11 is 7. 18 minus 13 is 5. 15 minus 8 is 7. 15 minus 7 is 8. 14 minus 9 is 5. And 17 minus 9 is 8. I hope you did well. If not, don't stress too much. It's the practice that's important, not necessarily the answer. I don't know why I have a Halloween-themed slideshow today. If you are looking for themes for your presentation, I use Google Slides, and if you use that or PowerPoint, then slidescarnival.com is a really nice place to pick up free ones. So this one actually was some old Halloween one theme that I quite like the colors of. Anyway, that's aside. Today we're going to have a look at subtraction. I'm not going to go through yesterday's worksheet with addition. I think for many of you that was quite familiar. I think also that for many of you subtraction will be familiar. I think that when we get to multiplication and division, we'll be moving into sort of a little bit more shaky territory for many of you. But with subtraction, we're going to look at it in 3 parts. Firstly, we're going to look at subtraction where it doesn't need to borrow. Then we're going to look at subtraction with borrowing. And then later on, we're going to look at subtraction where you got to borrow not from next door, but further down the line. So, like I said previously, there are many different ways in which we can subtract and get the right answer. And whichever one you feel most comfortable is the one that you should use. I have found over many years of doing maths that this one is the one I'm going to teach you, which is also the column version of subtraction, is the most versatile, the most time effective and space effective, and that's why I'm teaching this one. But again, if your teacher teaches you a different one, that's great. If you're comfortable with a different one, that's also good. But it's never a bad thing to be able to manipulate and use numbers in a different way. So even if you are using a different way, perhaps focus on this one during this lesson, and then you've got another way to do something, which is cool. So those are our goals for today. understand their different ways, be able to subtract without borrowing, and be able to subtract with borrowing. Alright, so I'm not going to show you various ways, although there are other ways. Today I'm just going to focus straight on the column method. So column or vertical is the same way. So in the same way that we had the addition ones, we're going to set these out underneath each other, making sure that we align things on the right. So this is our hundreds, tens, and units, hundreds, tens, and units. When we align on the right, we make sure that they are underneath each other. So hundreds with hundreds, tens with tens, and units with units. Again, I like to think of this as a big equal sign. It's not really important to put this bottom line. You can leave it out if you want. I find it's neat and tidy, and I like my maths to be neat and tidy. Okay, so again, as with maths, we're going to work in sections. So we'll start by looking at the units section. So we're going to go 6 minus 5, which is 1. Mental arithmetic. 9 minus 8, which is also 1. And then 5 minus 1, which is 4. And quite straightforward, simple. There's our answer for the first question. We're going to do another one like that. So on your pencil and paper, I'm going to write it down. I'll give you a few seconds to get started, and then I'll go through it with you. So 784 minus 381. I'm going to set it up so long. Right, looking at our units first, 4 minus 1 is 3. 8 minus 8 is 0. Anything minus itself is 0. And 7 minus 3 is 4. 403, there's our answer. Next one. And this is the last one where we won't have to borrow, the last of the really straightforward ones, the ones that you should be comfortable with from grade 4, definitely, possibly even grade 3. So I'm not going to give you any time. If you want to practice it, just pause the video. I'm going to move on to the slightly more tricky ones after this, so then I'll give you a bit more time. So 6, 5, 3, I think possibly the most common mistake that I see with this level of simple one is when people accidentally add instead of subtract. So often your teachers will mix up addition and subtraction, and you just need to be super sure that you take note of which one you're doing. And that's really just paying a little bit closer attention, making sure that you are good. Oh, okay, I see. I've moved for the first time onto the slightly more tricky ones. So now we have a situation where we've got 3 minus 5. And let's imagine that I have 3 apples, but I need to give them to 5 different people. I'm not going to draw all my people, but let's imagine we've got 5 different people. I can't really do that. So, well, unless I broke them up, but we're looking at subtraction, not division. So actually, maybe that's not a good example to draw. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to borrow from my neighbor in the tens. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cross this out and make it a 4. So that's 4 tens. And remember that 4 tens is 40. All right, whereas 5 tens were 50. So what I've borrowed is 10. So when I put this 1 over here that I've borrowed from next door, it's actually a 10 that I've put there. And I now consider this number together to be a 13. And now I've got 13 and I'm subtracting 5. So 13 minus 5, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8. Mental arithmetic again. Okay, and so that's what I'm doing. So that's the borrowing process. You're borrowing from the next door neighbor, if you like, from the tens. But just remember that when you borrow from the tens, although this digit is a 5, it represents tens. So it's actually you're actually borrowing 10. And when you put it next to it, it becomes a 13. Right, well, looking at my tens column, I no longer have a 5 at the top because I've crossed that out. I actually have a 4. So I'm going to go 4 minus 2. 4 minus 2 is 2. Now I'm going to look at my hundreds column. 6 minus 2 is 4. And there we go, 426. Okay, I'm going to put number 4 in. It's a similar one to this, and I'd like you to try this one without me first. So 783 minus 691. Your teachers will incidentally do this with almost all of your maths. They'll start with the easier ones or the easier type, and then they progress to the more complex type. We always do that, and sometimes it means at the start of the lesson you're going over things you're familiar with. But it's intentional. It's kind of like a reminder before we go on to the new stuff. I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So I'll give you another 15 seconds for this one. I will lay it out so long. Looking at our units, 3 minus 1, that we can do. 3 minus 1 is 2. Looking at our tens, we've got 8 and we're trying to subtract 9. That we can't do. We've only got 8. We don't have 9. So what we're going to have to do is to borrow. So I'm going to look next door to my hundreds. I'm going to borrow. So I'm going to make that 6 now. And this 18. So, yeah. Again, just a reminder that when we borrowed from the hundreds, what we were doing was borrowing 100. And so when we put it with our tens, and our tens we had 8, but 8 tens is actually 80. So when we put it with there, we now have 118. And what we're trying to subtract down here is 9 tens, which means 90. And with our magic zeros, we don't need to worry about the zeros. So we're going to look at 18 minus 9, which we can do, because when you do that with 18 and 90, you're going to see, so this is 9, and this is also, well, this is 90. So that 0 is the place here. That's a long, long way of saying, or a long way of going through the reasons why why this is 18 and this is 9. All right, so now we can subtract 9 from 18, which gives us 9, which is actually 90 in the big picture, but we can treat it as a 9. Now we've got, not looking at our 7 anymore, we're looking at our 6 because that's what's left over. So 6 minus 6 is 0. You can write the 0 in the front, but that's like we're saying there's 0 hundreds. So we may as well just leave it out because we've all agreed that if there's 0 of something, we don't put it in. Okay, so in the first one, in number 3, our borrowing was we borrowed from the tens for the units, and in the next one we borrowed from the hundreds for the tens. You always borrow from the neighbor on the left. Just before I start number 5, in fact, no, let me write down number 5. And then once I've set it up, I'll explain what the most common mistake for these kind is with grade 5s and grade 4s. It's just the most common mistake that children make in this kind of problem. And it's useful to know that, because then you can hopefully avoid it. Right. Just quickly, this is the common mistake. People see a 3 and a 6 and they go 6 minus 3, because we're used to doing the bigger number minus the smaller number. But in this case, we've always got to take the number on the bottom away from the number on the top. And that's the thing to remember. So if we consider this number as a whole number, 503 is bigger than 236. But when we're just considering the units part of that, there is actually it's the difference. But just, yeah, please always, it's the top number minus the bottom, not the other way around. Okay, this is the next level up. So I'm trying to take 6 from 3 and I don't have enough. And when I look to my neighbor doesn't have enough either. And so my neighbor is going to go to his neighbor. I'm going to see if he can borrow. So we cross that out and that becomes a 4, which means this is now a 10. But now now the 3 can borrow from the 10. So I cross out the 10 and put a 9. And then I carry the 1 across to the 3. So now I've got 13 here, 9 there, and 4 there. So 13 minus 6 is 5. No, sorry. Oh, my goodness, is 7. Mental arithmetic, people. 9 minus 3 is 6. 4 minus 2 is 2. And there's my answer. Number 6. 1204 minus 486. Try this one on your own. I'll lay it out, and then if you need more time, you can pause it. Right, first we're going to start with, if you need more time, just pause. 4 minus 6, which we can't do, our neighbor doesn't have, and his neighbor, well, we're going to have to borrow from 2 doors down. So cross that out and that becomes a 1, and this now becomes a 10. We cross the 10 out, make it a 9, so we can borrow for the units. 14 minus 6 we can do, that's 8. 9 minus 8, easy enough, 1. Now we come to this problem where we're trying to go 1 minus 4. And again, we can't do that, and so we're going to have to borrow once again. And this time we're going to borrow from the thousands. So we cross out that, and he becomes a 0, because 0 is 1 less than 1. And we carry that 1 across to here, where it's now an 11. So I hope you can see that's an 11. 11 minus 4 is 7. 0, 0. So there's nothing in the front. We're not going to write it. So our final answer is 718. So this one, number 6, was the first time we had to borrow for something where we'd borrowed from. So the hundreds was very generous to lend to the units, the tens and the units, but then it didn't have enough for itself, so then it had to borrow from the thousands. Might look complicated. I think it looks much easier with colors in there. With practice, it becomes easier. Okay, we have 4 more to do. I hope that watching these helps you to learn them, but also I would like for you to try them on your own. So 5, 8, 6, 3 minus 9, 29. Set that one out so long. I'm going to write down 8 as well. You'll notice that I'm using bigger numbers now. The requirement that, or the level of number that you should be able to work with in grade 5 is a 5-digit number, so up to the 10,000s. So there's units, tens, hundreds, thousands, 10,000. So you're required to be able to work with a thousands number. Okay, I'm going to lay out number 7. Three minus 9 over here I can't do, so I'm going to borrow. 13 minus 9 I can do. 13 minus 9 is 4. 5 minus 2 I can do. It's 3. 8 minus 9 I can't do, so I'm going to have to borrow. 18 minus 9, mental arithmetic, but we've done this one already today. 18 minus 9 is 9. 4 minus nothing is still 4. So the answer, 4,934. Try number 8 while I lay it out. I will give you a few seconds to get going. Maybe half a minute should be enough. And you know by now that if you need longer than that, you just pause it. Right, 5 minus 8 we can't do, so we have to borrow. Cross them out, it becomes a 0. 15 minus 8 we can do. I think it was one of our mental arithmetic problems today. 0 minus 8 we can't do, so we have to borrow. 10 minus 8 we can do is 2. 2 minus 2 is nothing. 7 minus 9 we can't do, so we have to borrow. 17 minus 9 we can do is 8. And 7 minus nothing is still 7. 78,027. Try number 9. It's the second last one. I'm just going to lay it out so long. Let me write the last one down so long, the question, while you're busy with number 9. Right, so we've got to start off with 7 minus 8. Incidentally, as big as the numbers are, and you only are supposed to know up to 5-digit numbers for grade 5, once you've got the pattern, people could give you the biggest number you can think of, and you'd still be able to do it. It just follows the same pattern. You subtract. If you can't, you borrow. So 7 minus 8 I can't do. I'm going to have to borrow. So it becomes a 2, and that becomes 17. 17 minus 8 is 9. 2 minus 1 is 1. 3 minus 8 I can't do, so I need to borrow. Comes 5. 13 minus 8 is good, is 5. 5 minus 2 is 3. 6 minus 5 is 1. And as I probably say like 3 or 4 times every lesson, you can see how important mental arithmetic is. Because if any one of these little subtractions you did here, 17 minus 8, 2 minus 1, 13 minus 8, 5 minus 2, 6 minus 1, if you got even one of those wrong, your answer would be wrong. And that's why it is just so important that you make sure those skills are good. Right, 10 is our last one. So lay it out. Let's see if we can solve it, if you can solve it without me. While you're doing that, I'm just going to set up an explanation I'm doing on the side. Don't worry about it. Right, let's go through number 10. So first up, 5 minus 5 we can do, is 0. 1 minus 7 we can't do, so we have to borrow. 11 minus 4 we can do. 11 minus 7 is 4. There I go again, giving the answer. 13 minus 4, 3 minus 4 we can't do, so we got to borrow. 13 minus 4 we can do is 7. 0 minus 2 we can't do, so we're going to borrow. 10 minus 2 we can do is 8. And finally, 2 minus 2 is nothing. You can put it there, but it does. All it's saying is that you have no 10,000s, and so it doesn't really mean anything. So I choose to leave it out. Right, glance over at the one on the right. Yesterday I showed you that you could add more than one in column method at the same time. You can't do the same with subtraction. So yeah, that's, I mean, if you were doing it, you'd have to say that what you're trying to do is to take these two numbers together away from that number. So then it's 0 plus 4, so 1 minus 4 because it's 0 plus 4. And 1, okay, I can't do, so that became 11 and then became 7. And now we've got to go these two numbers, so 7 minus 8. So you can see you can do it, but it's far more hassle than it's worth. So we rather don't do that. You can either subtract one of the numbers at a time, or you can add the two you're subtracting and subtract the total from the first one. But all I just really wanted to show you is that you can't subtract more than one in column method at the same time. That's all we have for today. So I hope that by now you are able to subtract without borrowing. You're able to subtract with borrowing, even if you have to go 2 doors down. That's all we have for today. So if you've got any questions, grade5@worksheetcloud.com. Afterwards, click on the worksheet. Make sure you do the practice for these. You're going to have subtraction and addition for the next few years of your school career at least. So it's good to be on top of them and practice them regularly and be comfortable using them. Plus, you use addition and subtraction in other problems when you come to more complex concepts later on. Have a wonderful day, grade 5s. Look forward to seeing you again.